These famous magicians you see on your screen hide a dark secret. They have sold their soul to the devil.
And I didn't let go of it. You're the devil!
Sorry, I don't understand. How is that not real? What do you mean it looks pretty real?
But this is far from the truth in reality. This is all misinformation, which we will expose in today's special. Starting with the world's fastest mask-changing illusion. Magician, he Hongqing dazzles the audience by swiftly waving his cloak over his face, revealing an astonishing sequence of different masks. Adding to the spectacle, he ventures up close to the audience with no cover and miraculously changes the masks on his face at an impossible speed. He performed a total of 32 instant mask changes in his act, all with the same method. With each point I address, this illusion will no longer be a complex puzzle to solve. Instead of just focusing on this mask alone, we need to take into consideration everything that goes into the execution, starting with the physical appearance of his overall costume. Isn't it odd that whenever magicians perform this mask-changing trick, they either wear baggy clothing or a cloak? I mean, I haven't seen an act like this being performed in a t-shirt or even a magician's tuxedo. In acts where they aren't wearing this traditional cloak, for some odd reason their mask change is no longer quick, and they have to perform the change under the cover of something they are holding. Even though we see no direct contact of his hands during the mask changes, notice one of his hands is hidden at all times while the other one is waved. For example, in the first 16 mask changes, his left hand is hidden at all times. After which he displays both of his hands to the audience, but immediately then hides his right hand until the end of the act. I want you to see two important comparison examples in slow motion in which he attempted to do the change, but due to one common mistake in both of these examples, the method was exposed. Here is the first example. The video on the left is him performing the change successfully, but the video on the right reveals the secret. Now, here is the second example. Those with a keen eye would have noticed in the first example, the flap cleverly designed with his costume acted as a cover for his mask as it slipped into his costume. The quick head shake was intentionally done to jerk the flap upward for a brief moment to time his mask change. The moment he failed to jerk the flap successfully was when the illusion crumbled. Similarly, in the second example, he wasn't able to time the motion of his right hand with the tugging of the mask into his costume. I can give more examples like these two to prove that it isn't a mere coincidence. Further, you can see in all examples the mask gets pulled in the direction of the hand that is hiding behind his back. Even the distortion of all the masks starts from the chin. At this point, the explanation is as clear as day. Behind his back are 32 elastic wires attached to 32 layers of silk with different printed designs to look like masks. Silk is an extremely thin cloth that is breathable and lightweight. That's why it's also used in quick change acts like Leah Kyle's act, which I have also covered on my channel. The breathability factor is the most important since it's covering his face. The wires are thin but not too thin. This is to avoid having them tangle up and are organized behind his back in an array-like structure. This explains why he initially had one hand behind his back for half of the mask changes. It was highly uncomfortable to perform this trick with one hand because as you reach to the opposite waist, you'll lose the strength to tug strongly on the wire and bring unnecessary attention to that hand because of your awkward position on stage. On a side note, this illustration is only to help understand the concept. The handles to pull the wires aren't on his side but behind his back, because you can clearly see he has nothing on his waist, which is obviously why his arm is positioned behind his back. Well, to be honest, the cloak was already suspicious from the beginning, but Dynamo's ability to fuse fruits together will leave you questioning whether it's real magic. He began by borrowing a lemon and a kiwi from a spectator's plastic bag and holds one fruit in each hand. He quickly brings his hands together and in an instant, the kiwi seems to merge seamlessly into the lemon. He then slices the lemon open, revealing the kiwi mysteriously encased inside. Indeed, this spectacle was none other than the work of demons. That's right, as Dynamo threw the kiwi, a crafty demon hidden within the folds of his jacket immediately caught the kiwi at this moment. Imagine a demon so dedicated to the art of deception, lurking in a magician's attire, catching tropical fruits. If it isn't obvious already, The momentary bulge the magician's jacket we witnessed immediately after he tossed the kiwi was not the work of a fiendish creature, but the clever design of a special pocket ready to catch the kiwi, similar to the method of how rabbits are pulled out of a hat. Here is Penn briefly explaining the method on the wired.
Magicians pull a rabbit out of a hat usually by not pulling out of the hat, usually loaded in right before. It's usually in a bag, it's usually hung inside you. It fits in there, usually a body load.
So, the real demon at play is Dynamo's mastery of sleight of hand and his meticulous preparation. The jacket Dynamo was wearing is no ordinary garment, but a magician's tailored accessory, designed to catch and conceal with seamless ease. Despite the kiwi's weight, the jacket barely betrays the secret, with only a fleeting bulge hinting at the hidden compartment. But the true marvel is the creation of the kiwi-lemon hybrid. The lemon's robust skin is carefully hollowed out, its pulpy interior meticulously removed. The kiwi, meanwhile, is peeled and sculpted, trimmed just so to nestle perfectly within the lemon's shell. And, to complete the illusion, the assembly of the lemon is as critical as the preparation. The once sliced open lemon is now ready to be sealed, ensuring that no evidence of tampering remains. A careful application of super glue seals the lemon-kiwi hybrid. It binds the lemon's skin so flawlessly that the unassuming eye would never suspect the fruit's dual identity. As for Dynamo's approach, it's all about the perfect moment. He watches and waits for a shopper to buy a kiwi and lemon. The shopkeeper acts as an accomplice behind the counter, nudges the choice, ensuring the magician's hybrid prop are unwittingly purchased. Another plausible excuse to have them set up for this trick would be that the shopkeeper could say he is giving out free fruits to these group of ladies to try them, which actually might be the reason we see 3 random fruits in one plastic bag. Dynamo took advantage of his jacket, but Yif pulling a French baguette out of his bare hands has definitely been the most impossible trick of this decade. He initially kneads a piece of dough, rolling it into a ball with his bare, empty hands. Then places the dough in one hand and magically transforms it into a large French baguette, as if it were materializing from a mystical portal. As impossible as this trick may appear, Yif unfortunately failed to execute this trick successfully on national TV.
梦想，这是来自幻想。只要相信，只要意念足够强大，就可以从梦想中。
Despite this embarrassing moment, you will still be left confused about how the original viral trick was done. The cameraman didn't do a great job following Yif's hand, as he moved the bread out of the tube in the wall behind him. Failing to track his hand exposed the tube, which Yif tried to cover with his body and by pushing the camera away. It was too late, however. This career-ending moment turned into a huge disgrace to his entire family. Just kidding. Nothing really happened. You may have noticed that in his original performance, the magician is not as close to the back wall as in his live act. Even if we were to assume that the tube was behind him and very long, things still wouldn't add up, since the French baguette was produced from right to left on the screen, unlike from back to front in his live TV act. One might consider the bread to be flexible, but in reality, bending the bread at a 90-degree angle as you pull it out would completely deform and break the look of the bread, unlike the perfectly baked French baguette we saw. The hollow tube would have to be positioned in the same direction as the bread. Now wait a minute, in this close-up shot, we spot a faint blur around the outside of his pinky, followed by a distorted bulge that suddenly disappears near his ring finger. Another greenish distorted bulge appears on his forearm. If it isn't already obvious, this is accomplished with the help of a technique known as a chroma keying or green screening. This technique is commonly used in video production to remove a particular color, usually green or blue, and replace it with another image or video. A green tube containing the French baguette was brought into frame right behind the magician's left hand, out of which he pulled the French baguette straight out, without having to bend it in awkward angles and avoid breaking and deforming it. Before this video was sent to have this green tube edited out. The magician made sure to keep his left hand stationary during the production of the bread, but because this is a video that involves motion, the editor had to go frame by frame in order to achieve a seamless effect. Green screens work fine with one setting if there isn't motion, but when you introduce movement, The angles and the shape of the green tube change relative to the camera, which causes inconsistencies in how the chroma key effect works across different frames. As a result, we were able to catch those distorted frames around his hand and arm. The initial part of the trick we still haven't explained, which is how he was able to vanish the initial piece of dough placed behind his left hand before apparently turning it into the French baguette. The method used was slightly different. Since we are talking about visual effects, it would be unfair not to have Captain Disillusion explain his craft of how objects are vanished by magicians in such videos.
These videos all use rig removal techniques to erase a dropping coin and a hand placing it back, a card falling into the lap, a bill re-emerging under the Sharpie, and a coin continuously spinning on the table. It's done very cleanly, with reconstructed pieces of the background and clothing showing only the tiniest evidence of manipulation. A subtle shape shift in the vest, the reflections in the metal shirt beads freezing briefly, and the real shadows of the hands blending in and out of shadows captured separately in a take where the hands didn't obstruct the table and the coin wasn't on it.
At this point, you may have an important question. Why didn't Yif just use the same method to make the French bread appear instead of using the green tube? You have to understand from the video editor's perspective. The dropping of the dough out of frame lasted around a maximum of 24 frames, because you can already see the cameraman purposely zoomed in to reduce the distance between the dough and the frame of this footage. So, it would have made his job a lot easier. But if you were to use the same technique for the production of the French baguette, the editor's job would have been a nightmare. Yeah, I know. Using video editing in magic tricks is like being scammed, but Cyril Takayama's ability to pass through matter itself without any video editing is indeed a miracle. He begins by having a spectator sign a playing card, which is returned to the deck and springs the cards towards the aquarium. Astonishingly, the signed card appears inside it. He walks to the other side of the aquarium and pushes his hand through the glass as if it were liquid. After retrieving the signed card, he confirms it is indeed the same card. Cyril's magic tricks started getting a lot of attention when YouTube channels like Cendrius began spreading misinformation, accusing him of being demonic due to their lack of knowledge. But to be honest, I can't blame them. High-end magic secrets aren't readily available on YouTube, unless, of course, you watch this channel. If we compare the signed cards before and after being extracted from the aquarium, we find them to be exactly the same, indicating that there are no stooges involved and the audience is genuine. For those who think someone off-camera just duplicated her signature manually once it was displayed, are forgetting that the signatures wouldn't look exactly the same as we observed. Keep in mind, just because there were no stooges doesn't mean the magician didn't have any assistants, but we'll get to that in a moment. When the magician apparently loses the card into the deck, we observe him doing an odd flourish. This move wasn't randomly done. It was, in fact, a card control technique called the waterfall control, used to reposition a card from the center to the top of the deck. You can see in the exposed view, the target card is slipped out from the middle while the remaining cards are dropped underneath it. Upon comparing this exposed demonstration with Cyril's control, we spot the same single target card being flashed here, while the remaining cards are dropped underneath it. At this moment, we know the signed card is on top of the deck, but then we immediately observe a camera cut. Why did they cut a portion of the footage out? If it isn't obvious already, since the signed card isn't duplicated, it had to be passed over to his assistant behind him. The footage that was cut out actually was the moment he palmed the top card off the deck using a one-handed card palm technique. After which, Cyril passed it over to his assistant behind him to get the setup for the aquarium ready. Now comes the most interesting part of the entire trick. I'll highlight 4 key points that will make the explanation easier to understand. Point number 1. When Cyril springs the cards on the glass, a card can be seen suddenly jumping from below the aquarium upwards. Point number 2. During the ending of the performance, water is observed leaking out after the magician's arm is removed from the glass. This contradicts the idea of him being a demon magician, as the supposed portal should have immediately closed when his hand exited the glass, yet there is significant leakage, which then abruptly stops. Point number 3. Why didn't the magician just enter his hand through the same side of the glass he was standing on, where the card appeared? Why go all the way to the other side? Unless, of course, he simply couldn't due to the limitations of the prop aquarium. Point number 4. In this frame, it is clearly visible that the card is stuck with an adhesive, which is why Cyril accidentally tore the card while removing it. I'm pretty sure most of you had figured out the method by now. This prop aquarium is cleverly designed such that the hollow base is where the assistant hides inside after grabbing the signed card. After applying an adhesive to the backside, he attached it to this large sliding piece of acrylic glass, which isn't confined within the top and bottom frame. Keep in mind, this sliding glass is on the inside, while there is a separate non-movable glass which is fixed within this frame, whose purpose is to contain the water in the aquarium. The assistant manually slid the glass up, which is why we saw a card suddenly jumping from below the aquarium upwards. Since this side of the aquarium was only designed for the signed card to appear and doesn't have any hole for his arm to pass through, he had to walk to the opposite side. On the other side, the mechanism of the sliding glass was also similar to the first side, but this time both the fixed outer glass and the movable inner glass have a hole parallel to each other. To seal the water from pouring out, a large water clear tape such as flex tape was applied to the inner side of the fixed glass.
Now that's a lot of damage!
After walking to this side of the glass, Cyril intentionally started circling his napkin to hide the hole. If he really was a demonic magician, he wouldn't even need to cover the glass for this penetration. He tore through that tape with his fingers and immediately shoved his arm inside to seal the hole and avoid the leakage. Yes, I know what your dirty mind was thinking, but stay focused. We can even see while attempting the puncture, the water instantly starts pouring out. As soon as his arm exited the hole, the water started leaking because the hole in the inner sliding glass was parallel to the outer hole. It took a second for the assistant to pull the glass down and seal the hole, which is why the water leakage abruptly stops. At this point, you are all looking to find something fishy with the magician's props. But this next trick by Dynamo, I guarantee, has no props nor any video editing. In fact, this trick will leave you pondering the presence of unseen forces. He invites random individuals walking on the streets of London. After requesting them to extend their hands towards him, they remarkably begin to feel a sensation of heat without any direct contact. The astonishment heightens as Dynamo encourages them to hold his hand, only for them to instinctively pull away, feeling an intense heat emanating from his hand. This astonishing feat is repeated with multiple spectators, all experiencing the same shocking reaction. Some religious individuals use this trick to prove Dynamo is assisted by demons. I don't blame them, because by the end of this explanation you would be surprised with the amount of research I needed to do to expose this trick. During the performance, we noticed the spectators describe heat coming out of his hand followed by a hot burning sensation.
I felt some heat coming out.
This suggests that a sudden burst of heat came from his hand. The simplest guess is that there's a gimmick in his sleeve blowing out really hot air, making the person quickly pull their hand away. But then Dynamo pulls up his sleeve and the spectator still gets hit by the strong heat sensation. We obviously can see nothing is hidden in his bare hands. It could possibly be a trick that most magicians are familiar with, which involves a special gimmick known as Power Expert's Electric Touch. This device has a switch that, upon enabling, charges the performer with static electricity, and they can immediately start attracting small pieces of paper. They can take it to the next level by lighting up fluorescent tube lights or bending a running stream of water. This same gimmick is also used to shock the spectators with the static electricity. However, in Dynamo's act, the spectator reacts after comfortably holding his hand for a few seconds. This delayed reaction is what disproves he used this gimmick, simply because that's not how a static shock works. As I mentioned earlier, the performer has to first get charged with static electricity without contacting any external subject, because if the performer and spectator get charged at the same time, no potential difference would exist for the charges to jump between the two subjects. Here is another example. Richard Jones performed this static shock trick on America's Got Talent. When Amanda made contact with his forehead, she immediately felt the shock. This means we are left with only one conclusion. These spectators are all actors who faked these reactions. Yeah, I know that's one hell of a claim to make just based off the initial analysis, but hold on, I'm not here to make claims without giving proper evidence. That's where my over a decade of research comes in handy. I've watched a lot of magic seasons by these popular magicians such as Dynamo, David Blaine, DMC, etc. During my research, I spotted an extremely interesting thing. We are going to investigate this specific spectator. What if I told you he was spotted on another magic season in which he was also a spectator? I am referring to DMC's Beyond Magic specials. In one of his mind-reading demonstration performances, we find this same individual attempting a Superman disguise by wearing glasses. If we compare the moment he smiled in DMC's performance to the moment he reacted to Dynamo's trick, we observe the same spacing in his front teeth, slightly prominent in his smile. Secondly, Dynamo and DMC are born and raised in the United Kingdom and share a common geographic origin. If we observe the location of their performances in each of these episodes, we come across a sign that says Kingly Street while Dynamo is walking straight into this stooge. Upon a quick search, we find that it is located in London, United Kingdom. And in DMC's intro, we can see the Big Ben clock tower, which is also in London, which further supports our observation that this has to be the same individual and not someone else from the other corner of the world. This explains why Dynamo's heated hand trick was impossible to solve simply because it never happened. Seems like Dynamo has been learning from Chris Angel to use stooges, but this next trick defies all logic and will leave even the sharpest minds baffled. Cyril approaches a couple seated at a table and begins by drinking a small amount of milk. He then hands a cup of coffee to one of the spectators as he blows into his hand, starts creating a wisp of smoke, and with a wave of his hand the coffee begins to stir. Remarkably, the milk he drank earlier seems to have mystically combined with the coffee. This is one of those tricks that people claim were performed by demons. Sometimes, I wonder how you even come to the conclusion that demons have stooped to such a low level that they have to stir a cup of coffee for you. Anyway, let's discuss the actual method that Cyril used to execute this illusion. First of all, you have to understand that the entire setup you see with these two apparently random-looking couples in this restaurant is not in fact random at all. These are stooges, but the role of these stooges is close to negligible compared to the science behind this illusion in assisting the magician. Two setups were required. The first setup is regarding this cup of coffee itself. This cup of coffee that you see has two layers, out of which only the top water coffee mixture is visible, while there is a base layer that is milk, which for this setup was poured into this cup first. You may be wondering, wouldn't the water coffee mixture mix with the milk as soon as you pour onto the milk? Well, you are correct, but that would only happen if you don't pour it slowly. This is because when you pour the coffee water mixture very slowly into the milk in the cup, two distinct layers are created whose behavior is influenced by the density, viscosity, and fluid dynamics. Let me elaborate on what I mean by this. Milk and coffee water mixture have different densities. The denser milk tends to settle at the bottom, creating that first layer. The buoyancy force acting on the less dense coffee water mixture is not strong enough to overcome the density difference, allowing it to create a second layer right above the milk layer. Furthermore, milk typically has higher viscosity than water. Viscosity itself is a measure of the fluid's resistance to flow. Pouring the water coffee mixture slowly minimizes the disruptive mixing, allowing the two fluids to maintain distinct layers due to their differing viscosities. But hold on, these two layers won't remain distinct for a very long interval of time. This is because over time, diffusion, natural convection currents, and gravity pull the two layers together, slowly mixing up the two layers. This explains why, after Cyril enters the restaurant, you'll notice initially there are no cups of coffee in front of the couple. It was only immediately after the camera cut that we see the prepared coffee cup with the two freshly distinct layers inside it, placed in front of them by the waiter. Now, the most interesting and amazing part was how he was able to stir the cup of coffee without physically contacting the liquid. We can clearly see in this close-up shot the cup of coffee really is being stirred without anything ever touching it. Some may assume that this was CGI. Well, if this really was CGI, then the entire explanation of the initial setup that I explained in the beginning wouldn't even be required. In reality, the method is a lot more impressive than you may think. For those who are familiar with laboratory equipment, you may have come across a magnetic stirrer. A magnetic stirrer works such that a stir bar magnet is placed inside a container immersed in a fluid. A separate magnet is placed underneath the container so that it attracts the stir bar magnet, This magnet is already embedded within the stir platform and spins underneath it, which is further attached to a motor that spins it. If the magnets are close enough, the stir bar magnet spins inside the container to create this whirlpool in the fluid. You can also use a paperclip as well as any other metallic object instead of a magnet in the fluid. Now, if we rewatch the performance, we can actually see a small whirlpool appear right at this location, indicating that an object is spinning at the base of this cup. You can also see Cyril carefully positioning the cup of coffee at a particular position on the table, and the spectator does not move from that location to avoid messing up the spin of the metallic object at the base of this cup. The smoke that he produced in his hands was simply using a magician's device hidden within his sleeve. One thing that doesn't logically make sense about this trick is that according to the sense of this trick, the magician was apparently teleporting the milk that he drank magically into the cup. But if we observe the quantity of the coffee, it remains exactly the same even after the apparently teleported milk appeared into the cup of coffee, which kind of contradicts the logic of his illusion, but since it's apparently supposed to be magic, this really doesn't matter. Feeling smart about figuring out this trick, hold on to that confidence, because this next trick by Dynamo isn't staged at all. He starts by borrowing a roll of polo mints out from the spectator's purse and requests them to take one mint while he takes another. Placing both mints in his left hand, he closes his fist. Upon opening it, the two polo mints magically linked together. Dynamo then immediately offers them for a closer examination. This trick is quite impossible to comprehend, since he handed the linked candy to the spectator, which normally magicians never do in such kinds of tricks. Those with a keen eye would have spotted something very interesting between the performance. Dynamo's right hand was suspiciously closed from the very beginning until the very end of the performance. For example, when holding onto the roll of mints, his fingers were curled, and at no point did he feel secure enough to open up the fingers of his right hand, which is an easy tell that he was hiding something inside it. But whatever he was hiding didn't seem to play an important role, since both the mints were in his left hand before and after the link, and his right hand wasn't involved at all. You first need to understand the concept of this classic magic trick called linking polo mints, which is readily available on AliExpress. These mints are not real candies, but are made out of rubber, and are designed in dimensions and color to match very much like the real polo mints. On the product website, they actually provide screenshots of this prop close-up. One of the polo mint props actually has a slit on one end, which enables it to link around the second mint. If we observe the product footage closely, we can actually see the instruction manual illustrating the polo being pushed into the slit. After understanding this concept, we notice something odd right after Dynamo takes one mint out of the roll. There is a sudden camera cut, after which he places the spectator's mint right above his candy. If it isn't obvious already during the camera cut, he switched out the real polo mint with the fake slit gimmick and made sure to position the spectator's real candy right above that slit. This is so he could easily link the spectator's real candy onto his prop candy by applying pressure with his thumb on top. This is exactly what you see him do at this moment with his left thumb. Once he successfully linked the prop candy with the real one, he opens his hand but does not have the spectator take the linked mints out of his hand. This is because he needs to switch it out with a real pre-prepared prop. That was actually crafted with two real polo candies linked together that are actually edible as well. The real linked candy prop was hidden in his right hand's curled fingers the entire time, which explains why he never opened up his right hand. We'll get to exactly how we can prepare the edible linked candy prop in a moment. But before that, let's understand how exactly he was able to switch the temporarily linked mints with the edible linked mints in his right hand. Notice the position of the candy in his palm. He is actually preparing to palm the temporarily linked mints, similar to how a coin is palmed. When the camera angle changes is when he switches out the fake linked candy for the pre-prepared prop. To execute that change, two things are going to happen simultaneously. His left hand will palm the fake linked candy and at the same time open his closed right fist. In one single motion, it looks as if the candy was tossed from his left to his right hand, when in reality, the fake linked candy remained in his left hand. From where we see the footage continue, he picks up the edible linked mints from his open right hand, placing it in the spectator's hand, but we see him flash the palmed mints right here, after which he immediately ditches them in his left jacket pocket. In order to create edible linked mints, you'll first need to control the breaking process and use an appropriate adhesive. The first step is to take a razor blade and carefully cut one polo candy in half. Then take one half and pass it through a whole mint. For step 2, we use the right adhesive to make sure the linked candies are edible. You'll need to use food-safe adhesives. To be more specific, you can use 2 types. The first is isomalt, which is a sugar substitute often used in sugar work for its clarity and sugar stability. When melted, it becomes a very strong adhesive and dries hard and clear. The second type of food-safe adhesive is refined sugar syrup that can provide a thin, strong bond. Keep in mind the layer of adhesive has to be extremely thin. Now, there is one issue that many of you will come across, which is a thin, visible crack where the cut initially was. In order to hide it, you are now going to apply white edible paint. As a result, you'll be able to blend the broken edges into the rest of the candy, making a perfect-looking prop. This trick might have seemed straightforward to your keen eye, but this next one is a puzzle wrapped in an enigma. Dynamo starts by borrowing a ring from a female spectator. He then picks up a wine glass, ensuring it's empty in front of her, and throws her ring right on to the neck of the wine glass, then hands the glass back to the spectator for close inspection. I'm pretty sure most of you had figured out how half of this trick was done, but you just can't seem to find that one missing piece to solve this puzzle. Right after he empties out the wine glass and reaches out to borrow one of the female spectator's ring, his left hand, holding the wine glass, goes behind his back, and the video camera immediately zooms in towards the spectator. During this misdirection, Dynamo simply switched out the original wine glass with one that had a ring already attached to its neck. This was accomplished with the help of his assistant, who we can see standing right behind him. In the last few seconds, we can actually see the assistant's right hand reach for that very wine glass. After the successful switch, he hides the ring that is already attached to the neck of the glass using his index finger that simply wraps around the ring, and therefore is not visible to the spectators who are around him. He fakes the toss of the borrowed ring onto the neck of the wine glass and simply curls his fingers right here. We can still see him holding on to the borrowed ring as his right hand rests to his side, while he reaches out to hand it over for examination. Now hold on, I know what you are all thinking. That question regarding the unique ring is the very missing piece for this puzzle. How did Dynamo know that this female volunteer would be wearing this particular ring, so that he could have prepared a second ring linked onto the wine glass before his act? To understand what exactly is going on here, we need to rewind to the beginning of this episode where he mentioned this.
Besides performing on the street, I get invited to a lot of red carpet events.
You need to understand the entire context of this event and Dynamo as a magician. Dynamo relies on gimmicks and less on sleight of hand, especially since this footage was recorded for television magic, and he would avoid performing tricks that are impromptu and would look best on TV no matter how much setup is required, only to make it more impossible to figure out since his special is called Dynamo Magician Impossible. So performing impromptu magic tricks or beginner magic tricks that have tutorials readily available on YouTube would not really be impressive. And being invited to a famous event is not a chance any performer would take lightly. This means that the magician and his team would go to any extent to prepare a foolproof method since they have one shot at it. How exactly was this setup accomplished? In the context of this event titled 100 Sexiest Women in the World, the magician's assistant could approach the spectator with the narrative of an exclusive beauty and empowerment initiative. They might explain that a luxury brand, known for its exquisite jewelry, is sponsoring the event and has chosen to honor the attendees with a special gift. Each selected woman is presented with a unique ring that symbolizes beauty, strength, and femininity, aligning with the theme of the event. The assistant can further embellish the story by saying the ring is part of a limited edition collection created exclusively for the attendees of this prestigious event, meant to commemorate their recognition as one of the 100 sexiest women. The idea of receiving an exclusive piece at such an elite gathering would seem fitting and persuasive, encouraging the spectator to wear the ring and unwittingly set the stage for the magician's performance. This narrative not only provides a plausible excuse for the gifting of the ring, but also flatters the participant, making it a memorable part of their experience at the event. Since this ring was a gift, the spectator immediately requested Dynamo this.
Can you give it back? Yeah, sure.
This reaction further sells the effect a lot better since the ring had now a meaning for her. If you have made it this far into the video, be sure to hit the like button. Also, consider subscribing. I would really appreciate the support. Well, enough with Dynamo's tricks. This next real-life teleportation will have you questioning the very fabric of reality itself. Magician El Mago Pop engages the audience as the host spins a wheel to select a group of audience members by the color of their t-shirts. The wheel selects black and requests 4 volunteers in black t-shirts to enter a transparent compartment. As the curtains cover and then are swiftly removed, the 4 volunteers had instantaneously teleported to the previously empty one. This is one of those tricks that looked like everyone was in on it and was entirely staged, when in reality, that's not really the case. When the magician openly says that the participants were chosen randomly, he wasn't really lying at that moment. Well, not entirely, that is. The participants' cheering response was also real.
Are you guys randomly selected?
But remember, the devil is in the details. Now wait a minute. I know those who believe demons were used to execute this trick. They might take this proverb literally and say that the devil was assisting him, when that's not really the case. I will now point out the details to identify this devil. We already know that the color wheel spun and freely stopped at the color black. Later on, after the 4 individuals had teleported, we noticed one of the male reporters spinning the color wheel because he was suspicious about its legitimacy in producing random outcomes. Upon his first spin, we noticed that the wheel stops at the color black. This may be a coincidence, but the wheel isn't racist. The female reporter, after seeing it land on the color black, spun it herself a 3rd time, secretly behind the magician's back. She seemed to have figured out something that gave away the method of the illusion. Now, one thing I want to get out of the way that some may have in mind is that these compartments were genuinely isolated from the surroundings. We can actually see right under and around it, so these 4 individuals could not have secretly jumped into a trap door. The base upon which it is settled is completely hollow from below, and no mirrors would be able to hide their escape, especially in broad daylight. So, these 4 individuals had to have escaped through a wormhole. Now Neil deGrasse Tyson here will explain how wormholes work. I'm just kidding. The method is actually exposed the moment we spot something regarding the 4 individuals that appeared after the teleportation. The male volunteer appears to be bruised up, with a scratch right on his forehead, alongside with the bandage right above it. The female spectator can also be seen bruised up on her forehead. This is very suspicious, because before the teleportation, the male volunteer did not have a scratch on his forehead nor any bruise, and the female volunteer looked completely fine. Furthermore, when these 4 volunteers started walking up onto the platform, they walked with their feet apart. When entering the transparent compartment, upon closer examination of this compartment, we noticed that there is a bulge right below here. If you haven't figured it out by now, these 4 individuals were the magician's team brought from Spain. The claim was 80% true regarding the people participating being chosen randomly. He was actually referring to the participants that were in the red, green, orange, yellow, and blue-colored shirts, excluding the black ones. The purpose of having true random volunteers in the colored shirts was to make the trick more convincing, which is why the truly random participants nodded to the question asked by the female reporter here. But notice the reaction of the black shirt group. They hardly gave a reaction, and even after apparently being randomly selected when the reporter tried talking to them, they hardly responded.
Is it your last days on Earth?
Isn't it odd that these New Yorkers don't understand and know how to speak English? This team of his did not consist of only 4 assistants, but 8 of them. The remaining 4 that we don't see are biological twins of the assistants that are hidden in the second compartment. When these 4 assistants walked into the compartment with their feet apart, they were avoiding a cavity in the base where these assistants quickly crouched after wearing these blindfolds. The blindfolds turned out to be a safety hazard. This is because when the twins had to immediately jump out after the curtains dropped, they ended up hitting their head multiple times in rehearsals and during this performance. We already saw a bandage on the male assistant's forehead, which means he hit his forehead during rehearsals. During their performance right now, he ended up bruising and scratching his head, which explains why it wasn't covered up with a bandage. Same case with the female assistant. The sudden shaking of the platform a few seconds before the curtain was dropped to reveal the volunteers had teleported gives away the fact that these volunteers had to quickly get out from inside the cavity in the base. The spinning platform also made it dangerous and difficult to maintain their balance, which is also another reason they hurt themselves during the process. You may be wondering, how exactly was this color wheel able to constantly stop at the black color after being freely spun? This is because of how cleverly this color wheel was engineered. Right at the top over here is an RGB color sensor that detects the colors that fall right under it as the wheel spins. This sensor acts as an input to a closed system that is controlled with a microcontroller attached to a servo motor. Servo motors are unique such that they are able to rotate the shaft of the motor to exact rotational angles. This servo motor is further connected to a motor driver to control the motor's speed and direction. Servo motors normally require 4 to 7 volts to run. Therefore, a battery power supply was easily concealed within the support beam. Furthermore, when the reporter manually spun the color wheel, it did not damage the servo motor because it wasn't spun with enough force. Many servo motors are designed to handle a certain degree of manual force without damage. They typically come with a built-in feedback mechanism, like a potentiometer, that allows them to maintain awareness of their position. Even after manually spinning, the servo can realign itself to the correct position based on its feedback system. Therefore, after the reporter manually spun this wheel, the servo motor takes over the rotational motion of the color wheel and stops it on the desired color. The magician also cleverly used assistants from his homeland on purpose to make it hard for them to be recognizable, since they are of a different ethnicity. He is actually exploiting human limitations of facial recognition. The science behind this is that human beings have trouble recognizing faces of strangers, since this is an imperfect ability and depends on several factors such as memory, attention, or motivation. In addition, it has been found that faces of the same ethnic group recognize each other better than those of other groups. The magician takes advantage of this to switch out the twins, and it is already near to impossible to differentiate the twins unless they are compared side by side. Using stooges once again is a major disappointment. But this next trick's methodology you will surely find impressive. David Copperfield initially can be seen lying on the stage and begins to rise, floating mid-air, as the audience watches in awe. To dispel any doubts of wires, his assistants introduce 2 large rings, passing them over and around him. Not once, but twice, including a second ring that spins around him. He takes it to the next level by gracefully moving into a glass compartment that is sealed shut from above, yet still miraculously continues to levitate within this confined space. I'm pretty sure the very moment you saw David Copperfield flying in the air, you immediately thought of wires being used to execute his insane illusion. But when he started moving the rings around his body multiple times and even levitated inside the glass compartment, it really does make you question your initial assumption of what method was utilized. Well, if you thought this, then you were on the right track. This particular trick that David Copperfield performed is actually a patented magic trick called the levitation apparatus, which was invented by John Gorhan. Patents are basically legal protections granted to inventors that give them the exclusive right to their invention for a limited time. These rights prevent others from making, using, and selling the invention without permission. This particular patent is in the public domain. Therefore, I was able to access this document just by Googling the US patent number shown on screen. Since it's public, anyone can view the details of this patent, which is why I'm going to use it in my explanation. First, we need to get the general idea of how the wires are connected to his body. As you can clearly see in this illustration, there is a harness system that is attached to his body. In this close-up shot, you can see this cross-like beam is in fact a special chair for the magician that wraps around the magician's waist and keeps him safe and secure. Here is the top view showing how the harness wraps around the back of his waist. Regarding the wires, they are very thin and are positioned in a plane that is perpendicular to the audience's line of sight. This means that if the audience is directly in front of the stage, the wires are aligned side to side rather than front to back. Each wire is strong enough to hold a lot of weight and is arranged in a fan-shaped array spread out from a central point. This arrangement helps distribute the load of the magician evenly and allows for smooth movement. Furthermore, the wires are painted black in color to help blend into the dark and visually busy background, making it even harder for the audience to distinguish the thin wires from such a distance. This is the particular apparatus where all the wires are connected to the harness system. Now, the main question is how he was able to deceive us with the rings. One may assume the rings were gimmicked such that they could open up from one side, similar to the classic linking rings trick. If we analyze the first prover that he used, you'll notice something extremely odd. The rings never really spun around the top of his body. In fact, they entirely dodged the area above him. You can clearly see the rings are rotated towards the assistant such that the entire upper area of the wires array was dodged. Similarly, the second prover was executed with the exact same concept. From the front, it's hard to judge, but from the side view, everything makes sense. The rings simply dodged the wires once again. In the case of the third prover, where he was entrapped inside a glass box, we clearly see a lid being placed on top of him. So wouldn't that make it impossible for him to levitate? Remember, these wires are extremely thin. The lid was slid very carefully in between the opposite ends of the harness vertically and then twisted horizontally so that the lid doesn't hit the wires while it is being placed above him. From the side view, you can see that the wires are still connected to him and the lid obviously isn't sealed airtight, which leaves enough room for him to allow the wires connected to his harness to be manipulated effortlessly. We all knew wires were involved for the levitation, but this next trick with shadows is truly mind-boggling. Josephine Lee steps into one half of this cylindrical structure with her shadow clearly visible under the cover. Strangely, as her shadow moves to the other half, her physical form doesn't follow, pushing her into the shadow realm. Both halves then appear empty. Suddenly, her shadow seems to merge into the second half. When the cover is removed, Josephine Lee astonishingly reappears materialized from her own shadow, leaving the audience spellbound. Upon inspecting the center section, no hidden doors or passageways were found for her to cross to the other side. Moreover, had she crossed, she would have been immediately visible due to the center's extreme thinness, eliminating any possibility of hiding within. Observing the performance closely reveals that initially her assistant holding a light behind her casts her shadow on the paper. As her shadow appears to melt through the first half, the assistant subtly moves leftward across the stage, taking small noticeable steps. Suddenly the light is turned off. Concurrently, as she seemingly vanishes, an anomaly is observed at the base of the structure's second section. Zooming in reveals a protrusion and a distinct gap where the flap disconnects from the base. Additionally, movement is detected beneath the platform supporting the cylindrical structure. At the moment when both sides seem empty, the base of the cylindrical structure exhibits two rectangular flaps. The method behind Josephine Lee's trick is pretty obvious at this point. To accomplish this illusion, the assistant's precise manipulation of the light source was crucial. Initially, when the light was behind the magician, her shadow was cast onto the paper frame. However, as the assistant subtly moved the light to the left, the shadow shifted to the right, creating the illusion of her fading into a shadow realm. When the magician appeared to vanish, the light behind her was swiftly turned off and the theater lights activated, obscuring her true position, previously inferred from her shadow. During the darkness, she utilized this moment to open a previously noticed rectangular flap at the base of the structure, crawling into a space large enough to conceal her. In doing so, she inadvertently nudged the base of the second section, causing the noticeable bump. After concealing herself within the base, the paper frame was removed, revealing empty sections, as she wasn't actually in them. Subsequently, the assistant, now positioned differently, mimicked the shadow's return movement, aiding Lee in re-emerging from the illusion. The hidden compartment was predictable, but this next trick is far more interesting, where an insanely quick swapping of places between magicians happened. The magician starts by climbing into a transparent compartment, suspended above the ground, and once enclosed inside, the magician extends a hand through a small opening, making his presence known. The assistant then drapes a cloth over the compartment. With a swift motion of the cloth, the assistant and the magician swap places. The cloth is once again placed over the compartment. This time, when it's whisked away, a third person miraculously appears out of nowhere. I mean, the pace at which the switch took place seems humanly impossible, but sometimes such quick-paced acts can go horribly wrong, as in this particular performance.
Olha o Gurgureira, olha lá. Não tem pra onde ele escapar. Quero ver onde é que ele vai. Não tem pra onde ir. Olha o Gurgureira.
Their failure pretty much gave away the entire method. So, we'll address a few questions you might still have in mind regarding its execution and why they messed up. One of the reasons this act failed was due to the structure's height, which was later rectified in newer performances to avoid such humiliating moments. They ensured the height was accessible without a ladder or stairs. This can be observed by comparing the performer's height to the structure. The actual height difference is negligible if you stand on this platform. Since the compartment is higher, the quickest way to execute the switch was to jump. This explains why the magician lost balance and inadvertently tugged on a rod holding the curtain, pulling it straight out of the assistant's hand. Now wait a minute. How is the assistant holding the curtain yet also seen entering the structure simultaneously? Yep, there's a second assistant also hidden within this support structure, whose only purpose is to act as a temporary hand substitute. Regarding the original performance we recapped, a close-up camera shot reveals a rectangular flap in the box. Analyzing the performance, it's clear the prop is designed to look thin from a distance on purpose, with this metallic strip giving the illusion of a thin beam. In reality, the structure has significant width on both sides. The third assistant hidden within would stand with their shoulder towards the audience. This design deceives the audience, especially with the wider part painted black to blend with the background and made to appear thinner. Notice how the assistant's legs are positioned towards the left, where we spotted the opening at the base of the box. The assistant exits through the hole at the base, and the magician enters headfirst into the same hole, mirroring the assistant's orientation. The second assistant climbed out of the same flap he pushed his hand through. Yeah, they on purpose chose a relatively thinner male as the assistant, as compared to the main performing magician to fit inside the support. The explanation for this trick was obvious after the failed act, but this next trick is some next-level mind control. Ryan the magician starts by having Simon and Howie independently point to a card in a spread, only to reveal they've both chosen identical cards. The act takes a deeper, more mystifying turn in its second phase, where Howie is blindfolded and asked to place his hand on the table. When Ryan applies pressure to Simon's hand, Howie also starts feeling the same pressure. Upon feeling the pressure being released, Howie raised his hand. Ryan took it to the next level by having Simon control Howie's mind, such that he mimics the lifting of his hand in perfect synchronization with Simon's pointing, guided purely by the sensation. No, demons didn't assist Ryan to perform card tricks. That's like saying the earth is flat anyways. Notice that when Ryan spreads the decks, both of them only contain 26 cards each. Furthermore, we find that the 5 of clubs cards Simon and Howie selected were nowhere to be found in the spread before they even selected their cards. It's obvious this deck is not an ordinary deck. It is in fact a specially designed deck that contains a total of 52 cards but in pairs, out of which all the top cards are the 5 of clubs, while the bottom 26 are random cards. They are paired with an adhesive such as roughing fluid or roughing spray. This causes friction between the cards. Therefore, they don't spread when pressure is applied against the friction, but if you were to separate the cards parallel to each other, they would easily separate. When Ryan spread the cards against the table, he applied pressure. Therefore, the pairs of cards did not split apart. Ryan then split the cards when Simon and Howie made their selection by splitting the cards parallel to each other. So, it did not matter which card Howie or Simon pointed to, every selection could produce the 5 of clubs. Regarding the mind control trick, you need to understand the concept of dual reality in mentalism. Dual reality is when a single set of instructions given by the mentalist is interpreted in 2 different ways. In this case, Howie has interpreted the instructions in one way, while the rest of the audience in the theater and US viewers at home have interpreted the event in a different manner. You see, the moment Ryan asked Howie to wear the blindfold was the moment his visual input was completely blocked off. Howie now relied on his remaining 4 senses, out of which his sense of listening and touch was utilized. To create Howie's reality, he was given a very specific set of instructions. Listen carefully.
Can you feel this pressure here?
I do feel that.
When Ryan had placed his right index finger on the back of his hand, we all assumed the pressure that Ryan was referring to was regarding the index finger pushing against the back of his hand. Well, that's where we were deceived. What Ryan is actually doing is applying pressure with his left foot on Howie's right foot. In Howie's mind, he thought Ryan was talking about the pressure that was being applied on his right foot. Now, when we see him lifting his left index off Simon's hand, Ryan simultaneously lifts his left foot off Howie's foot. He then places it again, while repeating the instructions of feeling the pressure, which once again Howie felt on his foot. When it came to Simon controlling Howie's mind, the same technique of applying pressure on the foot was used, but this time Ryan had to time it with Simon's hand movement. You'll also notice there is a noticeable delay between the moment Simon and Howie raised their hands, showing the timing to indicate Howie with his foot was slightly off. Secondly, we notice Ryan jerk his body to his left, a second after Simon raises his hand, further exposing the method Ryan used. Mind control is in the mind of the viewers, but this next trick is pure eye candy. Ben starts with a glass containing slips of paper with object names written by the audience. He pours these onto a Chinese fan, and as he waves, only one piece remains, which Simon reads as egg. Ben then places this paper on the fan. As he bounces it, the paper miraculously enlarges and transforms into a real egg. He even cracks the egg into the glass, proving its authenticity. Before I explain this trick, I want to point out several things that will make sense in a moment. When he walks off stage towards the judges, we can spot something he is hiding in his left-hand fingers, which he accidentally exposed in this frame. You can see when he opens the fan, he only displays one face of it till he attempts to catch the pieces of paper pouring out of the glass. Furthermore, after retracting the small piece of paper from Simon, the size of the piece of paper is suddenly larger when we see it on the fan. You can even compare the before and after close-up shots to see the obvious difference. From that point onward, we only observe the paper starts inflating only when the magician hits it into the air. All these observations will make sense as I explain the trick now. First of all, the small pieces of paper upon which members of the audience wrote down different objects were truly random inside the glass. But the piece of paper that landed on the fan with the word egg written on it was actually a force. By the term force, we mean the magician always intended the paper with the word egg on it to be selected the entire time. The procedure for the egg to be selected was done by preparing the one-face fan beforehand, such that the face of the fan towards the magician already had a paper with the word egg written on it attached with a light adhesive. This explains why he only displayed one face of it till he attempted the catch. Now, the main question is, how was he able to transform the piece of paper into an egg? You first need to understand what exactly a kamifusen ball is. It is a popular traditional children's toy in Japan. Let's understand the physics of how this kamifusen ball inflates itself upon hitting it. The kamifusen ball is typically made of a thin and elastic material, which is pre-folded into a flattened, compact shape. In this state, the air pressure inside the ball is roughly equal to the atmospheric pressure. When the ball is struck or hit, the sudden compression of the material creates a temporary increase in air pressure inside the ball. The material of the kamifusen is elastic, meaning it can deform and then return to its original shape. The impact causes the material to compress momentarily, but due to its elasticity, it quickly returns to its original shape. As the material returns to its original shape, it creates a momentary decrease in the volume inside the ball. According to Boyle's law, a decrease in volume results in an increase in pressure, given a constant amount of gas in this case. This sudden increase in air pressure inside the ball causes the kamifusen to inflate. Once the kamifusen has inflated, the air pressure inside the ball and the atmospheric pressure outside reach equilibrium. The ball remains inflated until there is a significant loss of air or until external pressure is applied to return it to its flattened state. The magician was actually hiding a small kamifusen ball shaped as an egg in his left-hand fingers that he accidentally exposed in this frame. With the excuse of placing the paper from Simon's hand on the fan, he actually placed the Kamifusen ball. But how did the egg yolk come out of a paper ball? It's pretty obvious if you watch the very last few seconds of him bouncing the paper ball on the fan. You'll notice an immediate camera cut after which the fan that he was holding in his right hand is missing, and only an egg can be seen in his right hand with the glass. During the camera cut was when, with a slight misdirection, he switched the egg for the paper ball. I have a special offer for my regular viewers who have subscribed to my channel and won't want to miss out. Become a channel member today for $14.99 and get access to 9 Penn Teller's Fool Us reveals never before seen. Plus 3 new reveals are regularly uploaded for channel members every month. Join today and don't miss out, and as always, have a nice day.